Good evening and welcome to everybody. Welcome to our regulars. If we have any first timers this week, then welcome to you. We hope you enjoy it. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I'm again your MC for this evening. And tonight I am joined by Michael Bird, my former co-host of Nothing Left. Good evening to you, Michael.
Good evening, Alan. Pleasure to be here, thanks.
Good to have you. Now, we do have one apology tonight. David Adler, President of the AJA, is actually in Canberra meeting with politicians and department heads, and he actually has a meeting scheduled for right now, so he's unable to join us as usual. But we are delighted to welcome our guest speakers for tonight, Eytan Meir and from Tirtzu, and who we will introduce formally in a moment. And we also have Douglas Altabef, the chairman of the board of Tirtzu, with us also. Welcome to you both. Now, tonight we're going to be hearing about the fight against leftist anti-Zionists in Israel and the excellent work that Tirtzu does. The format will be pretty much the same as usual. Michael and I will chat with Eytan and Doug for about 30 minutes. They actually have a couple of little presentations, and we've got a video to show you. And then we'll open up the discussion to questions from the audience. As I do each week, I remind people to electronically raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and I can see Leon's already done that. The way to do that is to click on the participants button at the bottom, and there'll be a little thing that says raise hand. Just click on that and then we can see who wants to ask a question. The chat function's available as usual, but we do ask people to just keep to the topic of the night and try not to wander off on all sorts of philosophical discussions. Okay, Tirtzu is Hebrew for if you wish it, and it refers to the inscription at the beginning of Theodore Herzl's book on Zionism, where he says, if you wish it, it is no dream. So fast forward 150 years, and even though Israel is a reality, thanks to Herzl's vision, it is faced by a range of hostile leftist people and organisations that are effectively trying to undermine the concept of Israel as a home for the Jewish people in their ancestral homeland. Tirtzu is one of the better and more active advocacy organisations going around, as anybody who looks at Facebook will know. They take the fight right up to the leftists and are not shy about telling the world the truth about Israel, the Palestinian Arabs, and all those hostile NGOs that are actively working to weaken the Jewish state. So to find out a bit about the organisation and their work, we're delighted to be joined by Eytan Meir and Douglas Altabef. Eytan and Doug, welcome to the AJA and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Okay, so for those who may not be familiar with Tirtzu, I'm going to ask Eytan to give us a little brief overview of what you're all about and your campaign against what is called post-Zionism. And I think you've got a short presentation to show us, Eytan, so fire away.
So I'm going to try to keep it short. And I've been told that I speak very quickly. So if I'm speaking a little bit too quickly, feel free to stop me. Okay, so the question of what does your organization do is a simple question, but it's actually a little complex when dealing with Tirtzu. Because in order to understand the goal, you have to understand the challenges behind the goal. Usually you ask an organization what they do. They say, I make medical equipment, I provide food to the needy. But Tirtzu's goal is to strengthen and defend Zionism in Israel. So you ask the question, why do you need to strengthen and defend Zionism in Israel if Israel is Israel, it's a Jewish state? So the story really starts out, and I'm also going to explain how come you have people like Carmi Gilon, the former director of the Shin Bet, writing that Tirtzu is the most influential movement in Israel in recent years. So I'm going to try to explain this in a relatively brief presentation, and it all goes back to 2006, the Second Lebanon War. The war is over, and the country has this feeling of depression, of dejection, that we lost, we're doing something wrong. All the media is writing articles about ways that the army screwed up, about how the soldiers didn't perform correctly. And then you have a group of students in Hebrew University, and they decide to do something about it. Again, this was before social media. There were no Zionist organizations at all. And these students decided to tackle the question of how come people are feeling that we don't have any right to be in Israel. So they started to make these little group. They handed out flyers. They created material. They started handing out Israeli flags. They brought lectures. And then slowly but surely, this evolved to what we are now, which is 20 Tirtzu's, 20 campus branches throughout the country, over 6,000 activists. and the largest social media presence in Hebrew in the entire country. So what they realized back in 2006 was that there was something wrong with the country, but they didn't really understand what this feeling was. Why did Israel feel this? How come the people were feeling that there was something missing, that maybe we shouldn't have a right to be here? And then what we started to do was realize that, one second, let me see if this slide works, that there's a problem, and it's called the European Union, European governments, and the New Israel Fund. And we started to realize that they've been trying to bring these organizations, I'm going to explain more about it in a bit, and to try to discredit Israel, to try to say that Israel's bad, Israel's an illegitimate state, Israel promotes war crimes. And they do this by what we call a salami strategy. Why salami? Because in a salami, you cut up little pieces until there's no salami left. So similar here. For example, take Gaza. Hamas shoots thousands of rockets in Israel. We retaliate. Then you have organizations funded by the New Israel Fund, as you mentioned earlier, European governments, and they're saying what we do in Gaza is a war crime and it's illegitimate. So therefore, Gaza is illegitimate. Take the Negev, for example. They say that we're performing ethnic cleansing against Bedouins. Ethnic cleansing, not the greatest thing. Illegitimate, therefore the Negev is illegitimate. Take Judea and Samaria. There's nothing even to talk about there. Occupation, apartheid, West Bank, illegitimate. Take Jerusalem, the same thing. Illegitimate. You see where I'm going with this. The Jordan Valley, they say we're stealing resources. The Golan Heights, they say that it's an occupation. Tel Aviv, they're saying what we're doing against the illegal migrant workers is a racial discrimination. That, of course, is not legitimate either. The Galilee, they're saying that we're Judaizing the Galilee, that we're building up Jewish homes, we're discriminating against the Arab citizens. That, of course, is illegitimate. Then you're left with a little strip of land. And this little strip of land, of course, is then attacked by other organizations like Zochrot, which say that the Palestinian Arabs deserve the right of return, which essentially is flooding Israel with 5 million so-called refugees, and it's tantamount to destruction of Israel. So we don't have the state of Israel. So now you ask a question, okay, fine. There's all these organizations, they have a tremendous budget by the European governments and the New Israel Fund, but they're a very negligible portion of Israeli society. So how do they actually affect it? How do they affect me and Doug? How do they affect people living here on a daily basis? Now, the way that a usual democratic society goes is that you have the people, they elect the leadership, and then the leadership determines the policy based on the wishes of the people, right? That's what we try to do. That's when we elect our elected officials, that is what we expect of them. But there's another element. There's the top of the triangle. You have non-governmental organizations, academics, cultural figures, media, and the courts, and they form the elite. Now, what the elite does is they determine what's politically correct, what's okay and what's not okay. So instead of having the people determine what's okay and what's not okay, you have the elites, these anti-Zionist elites. And of course, it all comes together. Because if you look at all these different groups, you find people, members from these anti-Israel organizations in these groups, whether cultural figures are on the board of B'Tselem and Breaking the Silence, academics, they serve as all the advisors for all these organizations. Then you have the political correctness of the anti-Zionist elite affecting the leadership. And then, of course, they also subsequently demoralize the people. Now, this is how you have a situation where you have a government saying that the illegal Arab settlement of Khan al-Ahmar, which is right on outside of Ma'ale Adumim, and that's funded by the EU, they've been saying that they're going to dismantle it for years. But what happens every time they try to dismantle it, you have all the anti-Zionist elite in all these different places, the NGOs, academia, culture, they start, going crazy, and then the government ends up caving. And you also have a situation where you have tens of thousands of illegal migrant workers in South Tel Aviv, and every time the government tries to do something about it, you have this elite that torpedoes it every time. Now, what does Tirtzu do against it? So the point of Tirtzu is to do two things. One is to influence the decision makers, the members of Knesset, to do good, and to also curb the ill effects of the radical left elite. Now, we do this through a variety of ways. Again, I'm kind of running through this. I hope I'm not talking too fast for everybody, but we have research divisions that really do a lot of good research and show how these organizations are affecting Israel. We also have an Arab desk, which is a very unique thing because we have Arabic speakers that actually look in the Israeli Arabic media and the Palestinian Arab media and find out what's going on. And we've had a lot of uncoveries. A lot of people have been sent to jail because of our Arab desk. I'm not exaggerating, because of things they've written on the social media. We have these very high public campaigns. We have the English desk, which essentially is, we try to convert what we're doing in Hebrew because all our activities are in Hebrew. We convert to English. We have a media. Tirtzu has an extremely high media profile. The media sometimes love to love us, and other media outlets like Haaretz, they love to hate us. So they always want to publish stuff about what we're doing, which is tremendous, which helps us a lot. Social media, the largest Hebrew following of any pro-Israel organization in Hebrew, with 250,000 followers, which in Israel is a tremendous amount. English, we're not that bad either, around 75,000 followers. We have the Hasbara call center, which is actually people in-house calling Israeli citizens that we have on our database. We have a tremendous database of all the Israelis that have come to our events over the years, and they talk to them. They ask them what they think should be done. They ask for feedback about what's going on in Israel, and then they of course ask for their support, which we're thankfully a lot of times receive from the Israeli citizens, whether it's small little donations of 18 shekel, which is tremendous to know that we have the support of the Israeli public, which many, not all organizations could boast. We have canvases and activists, which is really the core and the foundation of Tirtzu is our activists. We have seminars, things in the Knesset. We have tours to Hebron and Jerusalem, of course not during Corona. We have this initiative, Shaming the Shameful, which I'll mention later. We have Legal Division, which does tremendous work on the legal front. And the last one, I have this little window blocking me. And of course, forums. Forums, as we realized over the years that instead of doing everything through Tirtzu, there's a lot of different people in Israeli society that don't have a voice, such as bereaved families, wounded IDF veterans, residents of South Tel Aviv, Gush Katif expellees. So we basically help these people have a voice. And there's been really a tremendous impact when for example, if you see that 100 bereaved families talk about something and they have an issue with something, it's much more powerful than, if let's say Doug or I have an issue with it. So I'm going to now give a small, so after I've been rambling on for all that time, you're asking, okay, great, that sounds good, but what do you guys actually do? And that's really the biggest challenge with Tirtzu is explaining what we actually do, because like I explained, this concept is very obscure. So I'm just going to give a few examples of what we actually do, of things that actually have happened in the past. And again, this is not really to brag about Tirtzu, but it's really just to illustrate the things that all those things that I showed you earlier are capable of doing. Legislation. We're not a lobbying group, we're a nonprofit group, but what we do a lot is we have a lot of good connections with pretty much every, I would say, Zionist member of Knesset and minister in the government. And we do a lot of advocacy, a lot of reports, and it leads to legislation. For example, we found out that B'Tselem, anti-Israel groups like B'Tselem were enjoying national service volunteers. The government was paying people to serve a national service in B'Tselem, which is crazy. Meaning, let's say I'm in the army trying to fight against Hamas, then you have someone else, a friend of mine, who's getting paid by the government to call me a war criminal. So we had this big report, it came out in the media, and now there's a law against it where they can't enjoy that. The Israel Prison Service used to let out terrorists early. They used to cut their prison time in half, by a third, if they exhibited good behavior. Now, not anymore. There didn't used to be a law against discriminating against IDF soldiers, but we found out that people used to go into some stores, some restaurants, Israeli Arab stores, and they would say, I'm not serving you because you're in uniform. We brought that to the public discourse, and now there's a law against it. We have large campaigns. You see here, there's a New York Times campaign even about what we did. The New Israel Fund you mentioned earlier. This little thing on the bottom left is a quote from Israel's leading investigative television program, which is like the 60 Minutes of Israel. And pretty much the 2 hours that was focused on the New Israel Fund, the vast majority of it was about Tirtzu, about how we expose them and how we're the ones that are the leading critics of them. And the quote here is 7 years after the attack on the NIF. The NIF is still an organization in trauma, which is fantastic because, like you mentioned, in Australia, you said that the groups have rolled out the red carpet for them. But in Israel, it's not so. In Israel, because of all the work that we've been able to do against the New Israel Fund, Israelis despise the New Israel Fund. They know what their true agenda is, and they're essentially not so welcome in Israel. We have this initiative called Shaming the Shameful, which is there's this phenomenon in Israel of these radical left, a lot of times tourists coming to Israel, they take their cameras and they stick it in soldiers' face and they say, oh, look at the IDF, the occupying force. So we decided to turn the cameras around on them. This has been a very effective initiative. We have our filmers going around and filming them. And you see here, the picture on the top is our Yehuda Sharabani, our field coordinator, filming a radical anarchist who calls the IDF soldiers Nazis and so on and so forth. We've managed to oust a really hostile anti-Israel organization from Hebron. Academia, we're very, very strong in academia. You see even the BDS movement wrote about one of our academic code of ethics, which came about due to Tirtzu, which essentially bans professors from promoting BDS from inside academia. You see Haaretz donates many editorials to attacking Tirtzu. You see Tirtzu has taken over political discourse in Israel. A lot of times we say that it doesn't really matter what your friends say, because your friends are always going to say you're doing a good job. But it matters what your enemies say. If your enemies are saying these things, then it means you're doing a good job. So when Haaretz accuses us of taking over political discourse in Israel, we know we're doing a good job. And then you have other stuff like things we do with bereaved families. We stiffen the restrictions for jail terrorists, things that like exposing a deputy mayor in Haifa who supports Hamas and Hezbollah, and other things like our legal department, which is like you see here on the bottom right. We petitioned to the court because the New Israel Fund grantee Zazim was doing an illegal initiative to bus Bedouin voters to the polls, and that was illegal. We found it out, we petitioned the court, and that was finished. So that's doing the bad. You can't only, that's preventing the bad. You can't only prevent the bad if you don't do good. Why? Because that's great that you're preventing all these things from happening. But if you don't educate the people and the public of why Israel is a just state, why we should be here, then it doesn't really do much good, because they might believe in Israel, but if they can't relay that information to their children or to people who try to, attack them, then it's not really going to do good. So while we prevent the bad, we also do good. We do good by a lot of different means. This is one of our largest programs. It's called the Seminars for Zionist Thought. We have it's basically a lecture program in universities that we bring top-notch people, academics, personalities, politicians to speak. And you see here, there's really thousands and thousands of students who come out because students are thirsty for this knowledge. You think that in Israel, everybody knows these things. Everybody knows what the San Remo conference was, what the League of Nations mandate is. That's not true. They don't know. And the students are thirsty for this knowledge, so they come out and we educate them. We also have the tours to Hebron, to Jerusalem. You see that our tours are a very big thing, because it's basically you have Breaking the Silence, bringing students and people to Hebron, and then you have Tirtzu bringing people to Hebron. And that's a big thing, because most Israelis have never been to Hebron, which people might feel shocked. And most students have never been to the places in Jerusalem that we bring our students to, which is on the outskirts, and we sort of do geopolitical tours of the city. You see here a funny little clip from one of these anti-Israel websites, I think the Middle East Monitor, and they took a picture of one of our tours, and there were hundreds of Israeli settlers storming Jerusalem, which of course, it was just one of our tours with a couple hundred people. And we do a lot of volunteer work, a lot of visiting soldiers, a lot of distributing snacks to them. We plant trees throughout the entire country. We have this amazing thing called the Zionist Salon, which we kind of established because of Corona. We couldn't do our frontal lectures, our in-person lectures, so we started bringing people to our studio. And there's been hundreds of thousands of people who have viewed our talks, similar things, lectures on Zionism. We have these great initiatives helping families in need. We have other initiatives promoting Israel's legal rights. And that essentially is the doing good aspect of it. And that's the end of my introductory slide. I hope it wasn't too boring for everybody. I hope everyone was able to follow. And,
Not at all.
Yeah.
So just exit the screen sharing. Thanks, Eytan. You're certainly very busy. Can I ask you, how big is in Tirtzu? How many people do you have working for you?
So people usually think that we have dozens of people working for us. We actually only have a staff of 10. And we have a tiny little office that we always say we always want to bring our supporters to our office, because they realize that their support is not going to some fancy office, and it's very, very modest, as we call it. But our strength really is in our activists. We have a very, very large base of dedicated activists and supporters, because the Israeli society as a whole really embraced us. So everything we need, we really have activists to turn to. We have a lot of volunteers that they do graphic design, they do filming, they do video, they do everything, and we're really able to amplify our small staff based on that. And we also have an amazing chairman of the board who receives actually $0 for his work in Tirtzu, and 24/7 is available for everything.
I'm one of the higher paid guys.
Well,
exactly.
Did you want to say something?
Alan, what Eytan very comprehensively just described boils down to walking the Zionist walk, besides talking the Zionist talk. In other words, it is really our mission, our goal, our mandate to connect the dots and make sure that our society stays true to Zionist values. Some of that is very overarching, and some of that is really fairly detailed and maybe not that significant in and of itself. But it creates a pattern of thought and behavior that really defines us as the Zionist watchdog of Israel. That we are the guys and the gals who are saying, is this conduct that we're seeing consistent with the idea of furthering the values of a Jewish and democratic state? And if the answer is no, then we're not afraid to be vocal, visible, and in your face about making sure people know that it's problematic. And conversely, as Eytan said, not only preventing the bad, but doing the good, it is stiffening the backbone of our citizens, making sure that they understand that they are part of a just and a humane and a highly, highly legitimate enterprise called the State of Israel. And, you know, we were talking earlier about the difficulties of going onto a campus in Australia. You could have the best Jewish day school education, and then you hit university and something happens. And it's true in the United States. I suspect it's true in England. It's a little bit different in Israel, thankfully. And the difference is not on the faculty level, because Israel's faculty is at least as left-wing, at least as post-Zionist, and if not in many cases anti-Zionist oriented, which is, you know, staggering to consider. Think about a professor advocating a boycott of his own institution. But, you know, what's different though in Israel is the student body. The students who are older, who have already served in the army, come out of national service, they're changed. I see it with my own daughter. She's in the Air Force right now. She's not the same person she was 2 years ago. Because young people in Israel are required to step out of themselves at a very young age, at the age of 18, and not go on to party, and not go on to think about what's good for me, but to do what's good and right and necessary for their country. And that is a great blessing. It is a great civic blessing. And so our students, guys like Eytan, who was in the Golani Brigade, all of our team serve in the army, and many of them are called to do miluim, to do reserve duty every year. They give up time from their families, from their work. But this is something that sustains you, and it informs you, and it creates a mindset that is saying we are legitimate. We have something here that needs to be cherished and defended and protected. And a lot of people believe that, but Tirtzu is unique in acting on those beliefs, is unique in taking the initiative to make sure, as I said, that we're not just talking the talk. Yes, I believe this, but we are walking the walk of doing what needs to be done to protect Israel, to cherish Zionist values.
Yeah, you do it very well. Now, okay, so we'll run through a couple of issues, and then we can open up for the general discussion. Michael, have you got something you want to ask?
Just listening to the fantastic presentation from Eytan, I'd like to ask him. I mean, a lot of what you do seems to be defensive, and the concern that I have as a Zionist Jew, and we have the same problem with the Australian Jewish Association. We have the same problem with Nothing Left, defending Zionism. You're defending it many times against Jews, either Jews in Israel or Jews in the diaspora. Do you find that is frustrating, that you have to spend so much time in a defense mode rather than spending all your time promoting Zionism?
Of course, it's definitely frustrating, but it's one of those things that you kind of just learn to accept, and you realize that even though it's frustrating, if you don't do it, nobody's going to do it. And I think that's why it really took so long to happen, because it's really hard to grasp. You say, really, but they're Jews, they're Israelis, are they really trying to destroy my country? Are they really trying to harm me? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes, many of them are. And many of them may do it from ill will, many of them may do it from ignorance, but it happens. So while it's frustrating for sure, it's just one of those things that the Jewish people were we're very complex and interesting people. And I think this is not really a new phenomenon. If you look back to the Hanukkah story, the whole story was really that the Jews invited Antiochus, they invited him into the country. You have the Hellenistic Jews. They said, come to the country, come take over, come to Jerusalem. And he came in and he ended up taking over. And then that's where you have the revolt. So it's not really a new phenomenon, unfortunately, but it's one that we have to continue to fight.
Yeah, well done. Eytan and Doug, the Pay for Slave program is something that us in the Australian Jewish Association has been pushing here in Australia, and we've had some limited success in getting the government to reduce its funding to the PA. Now, you've also been active in this area. Can you tell us what you've been doing and what sort of progress are you making?
So essentially in 2018, the government, they passed the law, the Pay for Slave law, saying that the government is deducting Israel collects all the taxes for the Palestinian Authority, then transfer it to them. So instead, they're going to deduct the money that they pay to terrorists, which I think was around 500 million a year. The problem is, though, is of course passing a law and implementing a law are two separate things. So actually, I don't know if this is a great timing for the question, but this week we submitted a petition to the High Court together with several other Zionist organizations, essentially demanding that the government implement its own law because they're not doing it. The way that it works is at the end of every year, the security minister needs to present the cabinet with a report detailing of how much money the Palestinian Authority transferred to terrorists in the previous year. The security cabinet, they get the report, and then they say, okay, great, for the next year, we're deducting this amount of money, but that is yet to happen. So while we have a law on the books, it's not being implemented. So our legal division filed this petition along with other organizations, and we're hoping that the High Court, although the High Court is not exactly a friendly actor towards, I would say, the pro-Israel Jewish and Democratic party, pro-Israel Jewish and Democratic part of Israel, we're hoping that something's going to happen. They're going to force the government to do it.
Okay, Michael?
Yes, last year, your Arab desk filed a police complaint against an Arab list MK for participating in an event celebrating the release of a convicted terrorist, which constitutes a violation of Israel's counter-terrorism law. Eytan, can you tell us what's been going on and what results have you achieved in this effort?
So last August, there's a member of Knesset for the Joint Arab List. His name is Sami Abu Shahada. He participated in an event in an Israeli Arab city of Shfaram, welcoming this terrorist who served, I think it's 14 years in prison. They had a big reception for him. Thousands of people came. They presented him with an actual award, and they posted these pictures to their Facebook account. Our desk figured this out, and they said, wait a second, this is a clear violation of Israel's 2016 counterterrorism award, which says that you can't issue any praise or show any support for members of terrorist organizations or for terrorists. So what we did, we filed a police complaint. And when you file a police complaint, you don't really know what really is going on. But actually, this past week, our director of policy who filed the complaint received a call from the police station in Shfaram, and they said, listen, could you come down here to testify? We're taking this case, it's ongoing, and we're trying to prosecute him. And not only that, in a recording that our policy director actually saved and then we sent it to the media, the investigator for the police actually said that they need to report this to the head of the police's investigations unit, which is one of the top positions in the police, which means that the head of the police investigations unit is actually involved in this case against this Arab MK. As to what we think is going to happen in the future, it's very hard to tell because they're very, very scared. The judiciary and the police as well, they're very scared of ruffling the feathers. Unfortunately, the anti-Israel Arab MKs sort of have a free pass. You have the High Court, they're always disqualifying Jewish MKs on the grounds of racism and incitement. Then you have Arab MKs who actually promote terrorism. You have actually a member of the Joint Arab List now who praised Samir Kuntar, the terrorist who actually bashed, I believe it was a 4-year-old girl's skull on the rocks and murdered her. She praised him. She said that he's a glorious shaheed, he's a martyr, but the High Court doesn't disqualify him. So we actually do a lot. I didn't mention it in the presentation. We do a lot against the High Court, it's sort of a talk within in of itself against the judicial activism of Israel's High Court. There's sort of, the separation of powers, but in Israel, there's not really a separation of powers because you have the High Court here and they dictate the policy to our elected officials, which again is a whole different issue, but we're very big into that as well.
They must not like you very much, Eytan.
No, especially because we protest outside their homes. I believe one time it was for 3 months straight. We protested outside the home for the head of the Supreme Court, Esther Chayut, every single Saturday night. And we were told by a neighbor of hers who supports Tirtzu that they're friends, that she hears it, that she knows what's going on and she does not like it. But wow. That's
Alan, to your point about not being liked, who likes us very much is the Israeli people. We have a very, very strong popular following in our country. We are seen to be basically the mirror of the values of the majority of our citizens. And when you ask Michael about the frustrations about tilting at those who want to demonize us, and isn't that frustrating? The answer is yes, but we know we've got the wind at our back in terms of the support of our citizenry, and that makes it much more difficult, much easier for us, because we see ourselves as reflecting a consensus in this country. It's not necessarily a consensus in the faculty of a university. It's not necessarily the consensus of the NGOs that are opposing Zionism, but it is the consensus of our citizens. You have to remember something really important about Israel, and it differentiates itself from the United States, Canada, Australia, Western Europe. Our citizenry is more than half Mizrahi, Jews from Arab countries and their descendants. These are people who have seen a movie that they do not want to see the sequel of. You know, they have a certain experiential mindset that is not shared by the Ashkenaz Jews who dominate most of the Jewish diaspora. So when you have that, and you combine that, by the way, with the Russian population, who has also seen a movie that they don't want to see a sequel to, you have a very, what I'd call, you have a very chazak core of citizens, and they are very appreciative of our picking up the cudgels, so to speak, on behalf of Zionism, on behalf of the state.
Yeah. Okay. Look, just one more from me and then one more from Michael, and then we'll go to our audience. Doug, the Abraham Accords have, I guess they've turned things upside down to some extent. What's your take on all of that, and how involved do you get in that sort of activity?
The Abraham Accords, which I'm sure you all know about, where we now have signed normalization agreements with the UAE, with Bahrain, now with Sudan, now with Morocco, are a game changer, a profound game changer, not just for Israel and the particular states involved, but I would submit that it has the potential to be one of the most powerful and influential regional coalitions that exists on planet Earth. It, first of all, changed the entire mindset that the only way we could have peace in the Middle East, that peace had to run through an agreement with the Palestinians. It turned that on its head. It threw that out the window. And it says that, you know, no, there is a lot of commonality between the Gulf countries and Israel. And of course, the commonality really boils down to fear of Iran, fear of the hegemonic aspirations of Iran. And I think that this is something that we will be able to build on. We will build, and it's a very different kind of agreement than the one that exists with Egypt or with Jordan. Those are cold agreements. There is nothing on the popular level. There's no tourism, there's no cultural exchange, there's no academic exchange. Here, you've had tens of thousands of Israelis already going to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, talking about doing business together, talking about creating, I'm involved with a couple of organizations that are already doing shared partnerships between young Emiratis and young Israelis. It's very, very exciting. We at Tirtzu don't have that strong a role in the outreach to the Emiratis, because really our efforts are focused here in Israel, but we're cheering it on, needless to say, and we think it's it can be play a very, very vital role in Israel's future.
Thank you, Michael. We'll take you'll be the last question from us, and then we'll go to the group. Yeah,
I've got just two questions, and this is either for Eytan or Douglas or both. We've had 4 good years in the White House, but are you gearing up for more activity now that President Trump has been replaced by Joe Biden? And how much influence does the so-called squad have on foreign policy and particularly vis-a-vis Israel. And just the other question on a different note, wasn't the new Israel, a few years ago, wasn't there some talk about banning the new Israel fund as a foreign agent or something like that a few years ago? Whatever happened to that issue? What was the outcome?
Eytan, why don't you take the second and I'll take the first?
Sounds good. Okay, so I'll start with the new Israel fund. Yes, a few years ago there was a bill that passed that basically said that they didn't want to really ban, they just wanted to heavily tax organizations that like the new Israel fund that funded organizations in Israel. But it was very hard to pass because there wasn't really any concrete criteria. For example, the transparency law that passed in 2016, which Tirtzu was very big behind, that's very clear. It says if you receive 50% of your funding from foreign governments, then you fall under the purview of the law. The problem with the new Israel fund bill was that there wasn't any little concrete criteria saying, okay, what exactly is, why are we banning a new Israel fund but not another organization in America? So it doesn't seem like that's going to advance, and it got stuck. But what we are trying to advance is more legislation. Again, lobby, but you're trying to promote the ideas that these organizations that receive the vast majority of the funding from foreign governments very often are funded by the new Israel fund. They really go hand in hand. So we're trying to advance the legislation against these organizations, and by virtue of that, the new Israel fund organizations it's gonna apply to them too. We don't believe that all these organizations, that if you receive the majority of your funding from foreign governments, you should receive nonprofit status and receive tax breaks. It doesn't make sense. If you're not a nonprofit organization, you shouldn't receive tax breaks if you're already receiving money from foreign governments. So that's one of the things that we're trying to advance, but there are a lot of hurdles. Also, the Israeli government is not so stable. You have a lot of politicians that are afraid to shake up the status quo because every little thing that they do against the organizations in Israel, because of their foreign patrons in the European Union and in the European governments, there's always an international incident. You have the European Union and all these governments issuing these press releases and these condemnations, and you really need strong politicians in order to pass these laws. And that's also a strong function of Tirtzu, because a lot of times politicians, not only in Israel in general, if they don't see that they're going to gain from it, they see that the risk is not worth the reward, they're not going to do it. So what Tirtzu does a lot of time is that we rally the public, we have this big media presence, we have this issue, we promote it in the media, we get people around it, we organize these petitions, tens of thousands of people, send these emails to, and then the politician says, wait a second, this actually is good for me to do. I know I'm going to get blowback from the media, from the European Union, but I need to do it because my constituents want me to. So a lot of times that happens. That's really the driving force of a lot of the things that they do.
Okay.
That's a great point, by the way, that Eytan just made, a critically important point. There are many, many smart organizations in Israel that write important research reports, that prepare important policy statements. Unfortunately, the way of the world is that a lot of those reports and statements get put on someone's shelf, they get filed in someone's desk, and that's the end of it. But we, as Eytan said earlier, we have in any given year 6,000 to 7,000 volunteer activists. We have boots on the ground. And when you have boots on the ground in a small country, you can make a stink, as it were. You can get press attention because of demonstrations, because of rallies, because of petition drives. And when you get press attention, you start to get political attention. And so our ability to command the attention of our legislators is greatly enhanced by virtue of the fact that we have that boots on the ground presence. In terms of your question having to do with the United States change of government, it's a little early to tell, but the winds are not blowing in a great direction. A lot of the Biden team is a retread of the Obama team. Obama has to take credit, in effect, for being the godfather of the Abraham Accords because he scared the Arab countries, the Sunni countries, so badly that they rushed to embrace Israel because they were afraid of losing the United States in its mad dash to embrace Iran. So we may be back into that. We're not quite sure. That doesn't mean that there won't be military cooperation because that's on different order of consideration. But politically, diplomatically, we may be back to a lot of pressure on accepting concessions vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And it's, you know, it seems absurd, especially in the light of the Abraham Accords, but, you know, that seems to be what's happening.
Okay, thanks. Okay, time for your questions. I've got Leon, Ron, Reuven, Terry and Hugh. So Leon, you're first. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. First of all, it was very gratifying to hear the success story of Tirtzu, Yashar Koach. Now, my question is this. Could you comment, please, on your assessment of the role and success or lack of success of Israel's formal elementary and high school education systems in educating students to know the truth about Zionist history and practice?
I can take that. I think it's a simple matter of these old, worn-out bureaucrats, the left-wing bureaucrats that dominate all the ministries in the government. One of the actually co-founders of Tirtzu, Erez Tadmor, wrote this great book, Why You Vote Right, But You Get Left. And the conclusion of the book was that when Menachem Begin won the elections in 1977, instead of just taking all the bureaucrats and switching them, the head of the Director General of the Ministry of Education, of the Defense Ministry, he kept the same old squad of what was from before. And because of that, you have all these the left-wing bureaucrats that are in these roles, and they're of course hire the people that think like them. Then you have a situation with the education minister, he might be a a very right-wing guy. Then you could have one of the heads of the education ministry being anti-Zionist. And it's very, very hard to impact change because every little thing now is a big stink. If you say that you want to introduce a different curriculum in the education ministry, then of course you have the same, all the elite, the media, the culture, all these figures speaking out against it. And then if you don't have an education minister that's strong enough to do it, it won't happen. So for example, that's why our academic code of ethics in universities was such a big deal. It made, you saw the BDS movement put out something about it. It made international headlines. And thankfully, Naftali Bennett, who was the education minister at the time, was able to follow through. And actually, he did it. We basically submitted all the documents to him, and he pushed it through. And that made a very big deal. But thankfully, it actually stood. But you need someone that's able to withstand all the criticism in order to make it happen. And that's not always so easy to achieve.
Yeah, sure. Ron, your turn. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation and the really great work that you do. My name is Ron. I'd like to ask you something. I've been involved with some things that are going on in Europe. And as you're aware, the EU countries, European countries, provide a lot of funds via foreign aid to radical NGOs whose aim is the demise of Israel, some of whom have links to the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Now, how is it possible for their funding to actually penetrate into Israeli discourse and political discourse? How is that possible? Can it not be stopped? Because if you're going to do a wonderful job that you are, it's like an electrician trying to fix up the electric in the house without turning off the mains.
Yeah, it's a very important question. It's a critical issue and a highly frustrating one. The German foreign minister visited Israel not that long ago, and our prime minister specifically called him out for. Germany is exemplary, as it were, takes the lead in funding a lot of these anti-Zionist organizations. And let's understand why they do that. The EU has been frustrated by its inability to impact Israeli foreign policy or policy vis-a-vis the Palestinians. And so what they figured out is if we can't go through the front door, let's try to go through the back door. And the back door is, lo and behold, there are Israeli organizations that see things the way we do. Let's fund them. Let's turn them into our agents, so to speak, for our foreign policy objectives. and see if we can be more effective that way. One of the things that Tirtzu is best known for in our country is exposing that lethal connection, between foreign governments and anti-Zionist NGOs. We did a very high visibility, very provocative campaign, the Foreign Agent campaign a few years ago, connecting those dots. And I will submit that we changed the attitude in our country towards these NGOs. Previously, they were thought of as being maybe misguided human rights organizations, and now they are seen to be for what they are, which is agents of foreign governments. So it's a very big change. As Eytan pointed out before, they have very little public following. They have very little public influence. Their real influence is being able to go around the world, appear at the European Parliament, appear at the UN, and opine that Israel is committing war crimes or crimes against humanity. And think about that. If an Israeli shows up to bash Israel and you don't really know a lot about the situation, you're inclined to give that person the benefit of the doubt because they've come all this way to talk about something going on in their own country. So it's very toxic, and the need to have our public and the larger public understand that there is something very cynical going on here is very, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Reuven, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Eytan, do you have a map of actually Zion? And I mean, it may vary, but my understanding is the actually old city is. Can you clarify the definition of Zion, the area of the geography?
I'm not. You're saying the borders of Israel?
No,
what
no,
are the actual?
No. Zion, is I believe it's the old city in Jerusalem.
Zion refers to Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem historically is
not all of Jerusalem. Jerusalem is a big city, but within Jerusalem, you have an area where the Bet HaMikdash was, the Har HaBayit, and there's actually an existing wall now. There's two walls actually. There's another one, and there's an area road in between the two, and I believe that's part of the boundary of originally Zion. And Zion, the whole concept of Zion, is the Bet HaMikdash, to rebuild the Bet HaMikdash. So my understanding is Zionism, or Zionism, how you want to pronounce it, is rebuilding this area with the Bet HaMikdash.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
okay. This is
Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. Of course, that was originally, when you talk about Jerusalem, that's what Jerusalem was. The city of David originally, which is outside of the walls, that was already outside the walls of Jerusalem. It was only in the late 1800s that the Jewish settlement started expanding outside the walls. So you're correct. When you talk about Zion, that refers to historic Jerusalem, which is not Rehavia or Arnona. It's actually the heart of the old city. So yes.
Undivided.
Okay, thanks, Reuven. Okay, Terry, your turn. Then we've got Hugh and Debbie.
Sorry, I was hitting the wrong unmute button. Thank you for your talk. It's very interesting. I was most taken with Eytan's pyramid of the elite at the top, basically calling the rules for everything down below, including the government, which is something I think we've seen happening right across the Western world. But I'm particularly taken, because I see it in this country and overseas, with the way in which academia has drifted so far to the left. And I was wondering whether you are doing anything specific to address that within Israel, at least.
Well, yes, the Tirtzu really started in academia, and our whole point was to groom, I would say, students to become Zionists, so they wouldn't be indoctrinated by all the propaganda for the radical leftists. And as Doug mentioned, that thankfully our students are a little older. They're not 18-year-olds. They've already finished the army, so it's more easier to connect to them. So we have campus branches in all the Israeli universities and all the major college campuses. So it's 20. We have actually like people there on the ground. We're doing events, volunteer work, programs, seminars, lectures, tours, everything that's all from the campuses. And the point of that is really to combat all the the propaganda spewed by these radical academics. We actually have a website called Know the Anti-Israeli Professor, which we have a Hebrew version and an English version. And you can actually see lists of, I believe it's over 150 professors who are Israeli, most of them in Israel. They teach at universities, Hebrew University, Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion, and this is what they do. They promote boycotts, they promote the delegitimization of Israel. So that's why it's really important to groom the next generation to believe in the justness of the Zionist cause. And that's really our, I guess, I said in the beginning, our goal is to defend and strengthen Zionism, but one of our, I guess, the ultimate goal is to really create the new version of elite, of Zionist elite. Like the pyramid you mentioned, it's all controlled by anti-Zionists. We want that in several years for that to be Zionist, the Zionist ones are going to be the elite. Then you have Zionist figures in the media, that the judges are going to be, conservative Zionist judges. You have the NGOs, the biggest NGOs are going to be all Zionist NGOs. So that's really what Tirtzu does, and we've already seen that it has happened. We've been around since 2006. There's a lot of people that are in the media already that have been from Tirtzu. A lot of people who've started organizations, they're in Tirtzu. Obviously people in the private sector as well, but in the public sector, we have people that, anyway, so it's working. It's a long game. This is not a short-term game. We're in this for the long haul, and we're thankfully already seeing results.
Yeah, very good. Yes, that pyramid was quite fascinating. I imagine that's on your website somewhere if people want to have another look at it.
Actually, I don't think it is, but
okay.
Perhaps why don't you send it? Maybe Eytan, you can send the pyramid to Alan, and he can disseminate it to the group.
Yeah, I found that particularly fascinating.
But Terry, to your question, Eytan mentioned this Know Your Professor website, which received tremendous coverage here, because again, the left thinks that they have the untrammeled right, the exclusive right to set the cultural agenda, and they have the keys to the treasure of truth. And when we put this together, the idea was, we were of course kiboshed and criticized heavily on the left for violating academic freedom. We said, no, this is caveat emptor. This is just this is like, the course review guides that are very popular on college campuses. If you take this one's course, know that he or she is boring or exciting or demanding. Or, by the way, you should also know that he or she signed petitions advocating the boycott of Israeli institutions or advocates charges of war crimes. You just know that going into your course. And it's been a great resource, but it really shows that we are not going to sit by and just accept this, undiluted anti-Zionism without pushback.
Yeah. Okay, Hugh, your turn. We're coming up to time, so let's keep the questions brief, please.
Eytan and Doug, some years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago now, I made a documentary called Whose Land, which AJA know all about, and it's actually presented on camera by Colonel Richard Kemp, and we've got a number of top-line international lawyers taking part in it. Now, I did offer it to Naftali Bennett when he was Minister of Education, and he put me in touch with some people in the Education Ministry, and of course it got no further. We've got it with Hebrew subtitles on it, it's English soundtrack, and the 95-minute documentary we've actually divided up into 10-minute segments. I would like to offer it to you as an educational tool. It only goes up to Israel's independence, but it looks at how Britain, and I'm talking to you from England, how Britain actually violated the terms of the mandate on almost every level. And of course, today, a lot of the problem that exists between the Palestinians and Israel is actually a legacy of Britain's violations during the mandate, and indeed the foreign policy of our government that continues to this day. I'm just wondering if you might be interested in using it as an educational tool, especially as that history has been revised so much.
That would be great. It would actually be great because we have an initiative now which is promoting the Israel's legal rights, so it would fit right in. In the past few years, we've been organizing lectures on campuses, basically stating out the whole history from the Balfour Declaration, San Remo, League of Nations, 1922 approving the mandate, and so on and so forth. So that would be great.
Well, it includes all of that.
It's an excellent video, and Hugh, Eytan and Douglas have put their email addresses up on the chat, so perhaps you can contact them directly and see if you can work something.
You'll be hearing from me in the next couple of hours.
Okay. Now, one more question, Debbie. If we'll make it quick, we'll take your question. Please unmute yourself.
Okay. Hi. I'll try get it quick this time. Okay. Now, yeah. First of all, yeah, I like to repost a lot of Tirtzu's stuff on Facebook. Yeah, it's a really good stuff. Now, yeah, I'm getting to.
We need a question from you, Debbie.
Sorry?
We need a question from you.
Okay. Yeah, with regards to Jewish identity, I understand that it's different in Israel from the diaspora. Can you tell me if you know, they're taught in primary school or high school about the link to the Jewish diaspora and link to ancient you know, Jewish history? Yeah, because that's sort of things necessary for their Jewish identity, and for that they have a right, you know, we have a right to be in the land of Israel.
Okay.
All I could say is that I'm not sure. My kids are still young, and I grew up in America, so I'm not exactly sure what they're taught specifically. All I know is that I know the anti-Zionist content that they're taught in high schools, and that's where we're working against it. But unfortunately, I can't say, and I don't know if Doug has any input. Also, me and Doug, are both brought up in the U.S. So. Well,
I do know because my daughter went through the school system. Kids here, and remember, Debbie, that and everyone, Israel has 4 tracks of education. There's secular, there's national religious, there's Haredi, and there's the Arab. The Jewish content in the secular track has been watered down over the years. Tanakh is still taught, but I don't know that it's given great import. Obviously, on the national religious track, it is, but in the secular track, I'm not so sure. As far as the relations with the diaspora, I don't believe that there is much that is taught on the high school level or junior high school level.
Okay. Look, we might just squeeze a few minutes over if that's okay with you guys. Phil, we'll take your question, so please unmute yourself and ask your question. Phil, are you there? Maybe not. Okay.
I'll leave you muted if that's
yes. Okay. Look, we might call it quits at that point. I just want to thank Eytan and Douglas. Look, I'm just in awe of you guys for a small organisation,
yep.
And you punch so much above your weight, and you do it fantastically. So I want to thank you for joining us tonight, and people are certainly welcome to go to your website. I'm sure you're happy to accept donations if people feel inclined. Thank you so much for your time tonight, and you just do a fantastic job.
Thank you, Alan, Michael, everyone. It's really a pleasure. It's great to connect with Jews around the world who understand the critical importance of this. And please visit our website. Please, you're absolutely right, Alan. We do this on pretty much a shoestring, so we're very happy to accept help. Thank you again for your time tonight. Great questions, And Eytan and I were thrilled to be with you.
Thank you so much. Now we're just going to wrap up our session. I'm just going to do what David does and show everybody what's coming up. If I've done this correctly, have I done this correctly? Can anybody see?
Yes,
okay. Yep. Okay, so as David mentions every week, we do ask people to do these three things. Join the email list, and this largely arose out of the ban that Facebook applied to Australian news. All of a sudden, we realised we were quite vulnerable, and so we do want people to join our email list. That way, you hear directly from us and don't need to rely on Facebook. Please like and follow the AJA Facebook page, because that really, at this point, is our main method of information sharing. And if you're not a member, we do ask you to please join. It's only $25, and if you want, you can donate as well. So please do those three things, and that enables us to do our work. Next week we have a guest that Michael and I know very well. Stan Goodenough is a fascinating guy. He's a very prominent pro-Israel Christian advocate. He does tremendous work. He lives in Israel, and he often visits Australia and speaks to people here. And we had Stan multiple times on Nothing Left, and he's a fascinating guy. So he will be our guest next week. Michael, thanks for your help tonight. Yes. Good to be back together with you.
Yes, just Alan, just one thing for our friends. We will be having Izzy Liebler as our special guest in a few weeks' time. I mentioned him before when I was talking to Douglas, but he will be our special guest in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, but I believe he's written a book. Is that right, Michael?
That's right, exactly. That's what we want to talk to him about, and other things.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you all next week. So for now, we wish you all a very good night. Bye for now.